going to introduce Dr. Simon Brooman and Ms. Sarah Stirk, who are going to talk about reflective practice in legal education. Are we missing an opportunity to give forward-speaking space to law students? Now, Dr. Simon Brooman is Senior Lecturer in Law, Liverpool John Moores University, and a Fellow of the Oxford Centre for Animal Ethics, and Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and Seeds Award winner 2020 from the International Society of Animal Rights. And Ms. Sarah Stirk is a Senior Lecturer in Law also at Liverpool John Moores University. So if I can hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to share a screen first off. The resume you gave me was very much about my animal law side, but yeah, I'm not going to speak about animals today. There's a lot of my work actually, which runs a lot alongside this, is about student experience and teaching and learning in law. That's where my doctorate is in legal education. I'm going to share this screen. I think we can all get that. So I'll start us off, and then Sarah, who is down there somewhere as Jay Cullen, I think. We've got a slight technical issue with Sarah.
I think I'm back as me. I think he's fixed it.
Ah, you are back as you. Yeah, Sarah is appearing as herself and not as her husband, which is a relief. Okay. This research is quite recent. It's very recent. It's about reflective practice in legal education, giving space to law students. I would refer you immediately, really, to a paper. There's a paper that Sarah and I have done in the Liverpool Law Review, which is just out, which is the culmination of the research we've been doing, which is called "Who Am I? Reflective Practice and Self-Determination to Redefine Employability in Legal Education." So I think it actually explains what we've been doing in the law school for quite a long time in Liverpool John Moores. The research actually goes back 19 years. And around about that time, we spotted a lot of law students leaving. So it fits in with a lot of things that have been said. We looked at how we could stop this and came to the conclusion that reflective practice was part of this. And I actually stole the ideas from social work and social policy, who were in our school at the time, and we're doing a lot of reflective work. We hadn't really done any in law. So we brought this into the first year, and it had immediate results, and we've been doing it ever since. And it did lead me to the second point there, legal education looking outwards, that I just began to form an opinion that legal education is quite insular. It does tend to look in on itself. So I think that is a context for this, that a lot of this work and reflection that Sarah and I are continuing is basically looking outwards to other discipline areas in terms of the research and what their experience is. Another context is the well-being of law students. There's documents out there, a lot of research about law students possibly being the most stressed discipline group on the planet, and which is, I don't think, to our credit. So that was certainly part of this, to see whether reflection would work in the early days. Persistence is obviously very important. Self-efficacy and confidence can be quite low, particularly in first years, and part of the reflective element was to deal with that. And I don't know whether other universities have this problem with engaging students. It seems to be a perennial problem now, with attendance falling. It does vary between institutions. And then finally, and that's why we are here now with the current research that Sarah and I are doing, is destinations and employability. Where are law students going? And unlike Paul's students, I think he was alluding to students most going on into the professions. Most of ours don't. We only have 20%. And I know that nationally, the figures which are quoted in that article above, I had them for 2018. And in the UK, there were 35,000 and odd students who emerged from law schools. And at the same time, only about 7,000 went into the solicitor's profession. And then about a further 12 to 1,500 went on to the bar. So there's a little bit of a gap there. Whatever happens to the other 26,500 students, I think, is a concern, and it's an identity issue for law. We are partly a generic kind of study, which is interesting, and we are also professional, which gives us a kind of two-hatted approach, which is quite difficult. What is employability in legal education? Well, I think this is a very slippery little eel, this one. It is difficult to put your hand on what it is. But what I would say to summarize it is that it's taken as professions to mean skills for employment, oven-ready students. However, there is a lot of literature which moves in the direction that it is actually about choosing the right destinations, about students developing themselves as individuals, the skills, understandings, transferable skills. Mance York, who was at John Moores once upon a time, he came up with a good definition of skills, understandings, and personal attributes. And a lot of that is so personally attached, it doesn't necessarily attach to professions. And I think that is a tension within legal education, that we are seeing skills as for the professions when they are possibly a little bit more attached to the person. And for legal education, this connection is a problem. But I think, in fact, a lot of it, and what the way our students in this study, and Sarah's going to come to this in a moment, is about the development of their inner selves, their confidence, their work identity, their personal exploration. That who am I? And I think that's very important. What is reflection? Again, a lot of definitions of this. Thinking about thinking is probably quite a nice reflection on reflection. Taking experience, what did I encounter? What did I learn? Where did this take me? Is a kind of generic way in which it's explained. But it is about thinking about things in terms of putting it on paper rather than just thinking about things, which people say, well, I reflect all the time, but it doesn't quite work like that. The process of writing and answering questions that are asked of you is a very different experience, and the psychologists will tell you that takes you through a different part of the brain and asks you to demand questions in a different way of yourself. Legal education, is there reflection out there? Well, yes, there is, but not much. I think there should be more, and we'll come to that later. It does seem to help with developing skills for persistence as students look back. And we have evidence of that in law from two studies from 2012, where we looked at diaries and reflection, and it seemed to have quite a marked effect on students. It's also used, I know that Jenny Gibbons uses this approach at York, developing approaches to subjects in law as a way of looking at the way you approach the study of an academic subject in law. So it's used like that as well. And it is used to develop the self. So there is a three-way approach that you can use for reflection, which is useful across the board with all the problems that we face. The barriers, I won't say too much about this, but there are barriers. I think part of that is already there. Lawyers tend to look outside. We don't look very easily outside our own profession. I think that is an issue that we should be addressing. We don't have the expertise in reflection. I think that is a problem, and it is a problem for some students as well. Well, alexithymia, there are some people who actually naturally don't like reflecting on themselves and are very uncomfortable with it. I found it was about 50% of the first year didn't like doing it, but most seem to get some benefit out of it. Learning and teaching culture, is it more difficult to change things? I think at the moment it certainly is. We've got all these professional requirements which are changing everything in legal education, which has been alluded to in several talks during this conference. And the paths for recognition, do they encourage staff to take the challenge of change? I think we are developing a very it's a monoculture of research which is very discipline led, and it is not actually encouraging teachers of law to do something different. I think that is again another conversation, but it is certainly the case. And finally, in my half of this is just to explain where this research specifically comes from. In the first year of our degree at John Moores, students are asked to reflect on the way in which they're transitioning to university. We give them lots of literature on the subject. I call them sounding boards. They have reflective exercises all the way through, which encourages them to look at themselves, how they're looking at subjects, also how they're making friends. It's going to be a real challenge this time in the way in which we deliver because of the COVID-19 crisis. But that is built into the module. And as I said, there's two studies that this goes back to 7 or 8 years. It's not always popular. Law students tend to like to do things, which are concrete or about law. But in fact, the evidence is that they get a lot out of it. So that's the first year. And Sarah's now going to take you through what happens in the second year, and because we built on it in the second year, and also what this study revealed of the students about those 2 years of reflective technique. So over to Sarah.
Yeah, before Sarah starts, Sarah, just hold on one second. Could I just remind those in our audience, if you have questions, It would help if you could just send your messages to me as the presenters are speaking, please, so that anytime you can just stick the question. At the end, I'll read them out. Many thanks. Sarah, back to you.
Okay, so back in 2014, we actually established that there was a real issue in the second year where students needed to be thinking about applying for jobs, for training contracts, for mini pupillage, and they couldn't really articulate the skills that they had built on and the skills that they had from working in part-time jobs. So I set up a second year optional module which was based around the students going out and taking work experience that they could do over the summer or they could do actually as part of the module. So they would have classes for the first 6 weeks of the term, and then they would go out on placements in a firm that we had agreed with them, or into a business if they didn't want to go into law. And what they had to do as part of this module was every single week after every session, they had to write a diary, and they had to tell us about what they learned and how they felt it would help them. And if they felt that they hadn't gathered anything from the session, why did they feel that way? And we told them they had to do this, and then at given points, so 6 weeks in and then at 12 weeks in, they had to write an assignment where they had to look back at all of those reflections, and they had to think about, well, actually, were my sort of notions of that lesson afterwards correct, or actually was it a cumulative effect where they started to see the benefit of these skills and these sessions that they might previously have dismissed as not necessarily being very helpful. Sai, can you thank you. So what we ended up doing was, after several years of this module running and it being very, very popular with students and getting a lot of really good feedback, and students coming to both Simon and I and saying, we finally had this space in our degree to actually not think about when the next deadline was and what the next module was, but to think about, well, hang on a minute, what am I going to do when I actually finish this degree? Am I doing something because I'm literally on the hamster wheel and that's just the next step? Or am I doing something because that's what I really want to do with my career? And for a lot of our students, financially, going on to the LPC or the BPTC is a really big commitment that some of them need to go out and work for a couple of years to save up the money to do. So they wanted to be really sure that this was actually the next step for them and was what they wanted. So we decided we'd look back and do some focus groups and do a study and see, well, actually, what did everybody think, apart from the students who come in our door saying, we loved your module? And what we found was a lot of the students said that the module really gave them this opportunity to think about what were they good at and why were they good at it? Okay, and if they weren't so good at something, why was that? Was it a confidence issue? And actually, they were very good at it when they actually overcame that initial lack of confidence, which we found a lot of, especially a lot of the females on the module. Confidence was a real issue in articulating their skills. And actually, when you gave them these platforms to constantly do it, their confidence improved dramatically. And what we found is it really motivated them doing this module, because they would have the employers come in and do mock interviews with them. They would do Q&A sessions with them before they went on placement. So the employer became an individual for them rather than a scary person who's going to interview them and decide their future. So we were trying to balance it out for them so they realise that when they go for an interview, it's a two-way process. So what we found is they said that, and this is a very good quote from the focus group, they said, I had to explain to people outside the university, and that really made me focus. So it was about them assessing for themselves, well, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to do for the next 30, 40 years with my career? Now I feel that I can explain my weaknesses and improve them and can use examples. So this was one of the key things we found with our students when they were applying for jobs. When they were asked, well, what is your weakness? They didn't know how to turn that weakness actually into a strength. And they were so worried about writing down weaknesses on an application form that some of them would say, oh, well, I'm just not going to apply because I don't want to do that. I'm scared. So this really, the reflection element allowed them to become more positive in the skill sets that they actually had. And they do say we did it every week and reflected on the sessions on what we had and what we hadn't learned. And this helped build my confidence. And I'm much more motivated because what we found is they saw the difference in themselves. When it came to the 6 weeks, they were starting to see the benefit of reflecting. It was improving their time management and they were starting to think about things. But what we found is really when we get to the 12-week period at the end of the term and they looked back, they said actually it reinvigorated their motivation for the degree. they realised why they wanted to do the degree. If they didn't want to go into law,
Sarah's she frozen? Looks like she's disappeared. Okay, well I'll carry on till Sarah's back.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Sorry, internet connection. What sorry, what we're saying is that also from doing this reflection and really focusing on their employability, their skill set and their marks across their degrees improved because they had this refound focus and confidence in what they were doing. And a lot of them said that they felt this reflection skill that they built on in their first year, but really honed in this module in their second year, they felt it was going to support them for their entire professional life, because by doing and building on these reflection skills, they thought they were vital for their entire career, because they're constantly going to have to reflect on what went well, say in a business transaction, what didn't, what went well in a case, what would they have done differently, if they're applying for promotions, well, what makes them special? Why should they get a promotion instead of their colleague who they've been working with? So we thought it was really beneficial for them. And so if we just go on to the next.
This is the autonomy self-authorship one.
Yeah. Okay, so what we found as well is that if you just go to Loretta, she said, I'd also noticed that professionals appeared constantly stressed. And this was something that we found that really came up, was the students were saying when they went into the working environment, they were quite shocked by the stress levels of individuals in there. And they said that they felt that if they could really work on their reflective skills during their degree, they were hoping it would improve their mental health when they went into the profession, because they would have a better idea as how to deal with that stress, because they could reflect in a diary, they could try and deal with some of those stresses, not get rid of them, but they could try and limit them by building on these reflective skills, because they found that it really helped them during their degree to cope with these stress levels. So I don't know if you want to say anything else about that one.
No, I think that covers it. We can cover some of it in the conclusions, because I think it's we slightly short of time, just another couple of minutes. It was quite revealing to hear students' individual perceptions of what they'd developed, and it took it along from being quite a personal journey in the first year about them being at university, and this enabling them, for a lot of them, they felt it enabled them to feel more secure in staying at university, more confident in staying at university. In the second year, it becomes a little bit more professional, looking forward, and what they are going to get out of this in terms of future careers, but also not just that, but their personalities. Who are they? Where are they going? What do they want out of life? Was a part of this, and I think any profession wants people who want to be in it, and I think for some of them that was quite revealing. So in terms of conclusions. We think this kind of reflective practice does have the possibility of allowing students this kind of space to think about several things as they go through their academic journey into work. It can be used also at a subject level. We've seen that not particularly as much in our own university, but elsewhere. And this idea of self-authorship and taking control of your own career and your destiny, I think, is quite important and is part of the university experience. And again, part of that tension that we have. In terms of recommendations, just a few. We were quite practical, I think, in the article to say, how would you actually do this as academics, as well as saying why we think so. Just careful design over 2 years, lots of opportunities, developing staff skills in this area, and doing more research in the area, because it is an emerging area that it would be useful to do that. And I don't know whether you want to add anything, Sarah, as a final comment before we take some questions.
I would say, I think, in terms of the careful design, we really wanted to let students know as well over the 2 years that it was okay to change their minds. So it was okay to come in the first year and be absolutely categoric that they wanted to be a lawyer. And then by the second year to say, okay, no, not for me. And I want to pursue other avenues of careers, and to know that the skill sets they had from doing these reflections could be used across every career plane they were going into, and they weren't limited to law, and showing them the transferability of the skills that they were gaining from doing these modules and from doing this reflection, so that they felt that no matter where they went in their future career, these skills were going to help them for the long term.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you. Any questions or comments? I'll stop the share.
Yes, we have a number. First of all, just something I have to ask this because in my job as career advisor here,
Mm,
I worry that quite a lot of the time I get into areas which touch on mental, issues, the question of mental stability and so on,
mm,
psychological issues, if you like. I can see that students have got things going on in their head that through my, life experience, I can understand that it goes further than just needing training. Do you feel that when you're covering these areas, this area of question of reflection, which I'm sure goes further, I mean, it does go
mm,
into
yeah.
psychological issues, do you feel that the people who are handling this in your institution are suitably trained to cover
Well,
this area?
we did have the issues with this in the first few years that we did this, because what we did was we decided that the reflection would be not only doing a diary but reflecting upon the diary at the end of the first semester, and that would be marked, if you like, and would lead to a mark, would have to be properly referenced, etc., by things. But it led to that being marked by personal tutors, and the personal tutors were coming to me and saying, I'm getting, we were identifying issues that students had very early on, and these were really coming out to the fore. We're not capable of dealing with all those. But your question is whether the university was. I think the university, John Moores, was very good. We were actually, I don't want to create the impression there was a line of law students heading for counselling. However, I would say it was a short queue. Certainly, that there were quite a few people who went in that direction, and also just any other issues, that tensions that it opened up a lot of issues we were able to address easily as personal tutors.
Yeah, I think it improved the pastoral support, if that makes sense, because the personal tutors were involved and they could see this development. Sometimes students are a bit nervous to come and talk to you face to face about these issues, but because you had this diary and they'd reflected on it, it enabled you to really signpost them in the right direction so that you could support them and you could really help them in a way they felt more confident in terms of opening up to you in these sorts of settings. So it developed really good links, didn't it, Si, with our
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
student wellbeing centres, and
it did.
it sort of, yeah, it just made those links a lot stronger.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I've got a question now from Alex Nicholson, who's one of our speakers coming up in a moment. He says, you mentioned that in the UK, most law students do not ultimately qualify as solicitors or barristers. Do you
Mm.
think that providing students with these kinds of opportunities to reflect and develop their own professional aspirations sufficiently mitigates the ethical issue that law schools arguably face in recruiting large numbers of students in that context?
Well, I've always thought, I think it is wrong to see a law degree as merely a degree which is going to be used by lawyers. I think that's a real misconception that we've got. I think obviously it is a tension in legal education. I think law is a fascinating subject. I think law and philosophy is a fascinating subject. I think the history of legal development, I don't think we should just own it just for lawyers, personally. And I agree in a broad liberal approach to education. I'll put my cards on the table. And I think if you want to study law, then you should be able to. Whether you use that in the professions should be your choice. Students are paying for it. I don't see the issue with that. If we're promising the earth, and I think we're quite careful at John was not to promise the earth, we reveal this kind of information to them, and that was part of this. This is what you're presented with. To be real with them from the start. Do you know how many students are going into the professions? And this, I think, equips them to reflect and say whether that is the right destination for them.
Yeah, I would say we think of it more as like a broad liberal arts education. We want them to have exposure to lots of different topics, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be lawyers. I know from my employability module, I keep follow up on these students, and loads of them actually taking the placement has put them off law. They've gone into business, they've been student union president, they've gone into, I've had them go into accountancy, which was a completely different role and route. But they said it didn't matter because the skills they got from that law degree helped them, the skills of analysis and things like that. It doesn't matter what profession you're going into, you need those skills. And with this employability and this reflection, again, they are skills that they need no matter what they do. So yes, Si's right. We are very, very honest with them. And that's part of the reason on the employability. I have the professionals come in, I've got people in practice, partners, we've got people who've just got training contracts, and they say to them, look, it took us 5 years to get a training contract. I still haven't got one, I'm still paralegaling. And we let them see the entire picture, not just the straight route. And we often say to our students, you've got to get rid of the idea that it's a straight line. You've got to understand that it's going to be a nice wavy line, and your career's not going to go, you're not going from A to B in one straight line. You've got to be able to adapt, and we try and teach them those skills right from early on.
Okay, right. And I've got one from Justbul Kaur. Were the students given some guidance on how to write a reflective journal? And did you grade the reflection component? If yes, can you share the rubric adopted?
For a price, of course, I'm prepared to share. Yeah, that's we can negotiate on that one. Send me an email. Yeah, I think it's it was difficult. I did read a lot about this, and a lot of people say you shouldn't uh, grade personal reflections. I actually think it works exactly the opposite way around. You have to engage students in this, so the mark has to count. Students are very mechanistic. They want marks, and you can do it. You can create it around. It was created around the things like, making sure they referenced other sources and how they were comparing themselves and what they'd experienced to other law students. Part of the reason we did a couple of articles on it as well. So you can do it, and yes, there is problems with what they reveal to you, because that's the other side of this. But you have to deal with that sensitively. So yes, it can be done, and I may be prepared to share the rubric.
And I think it's important to note, isn't it, Si, that they do it in the first year where they're taught a lot of reflection and ILD, and when it comes to employability, we refresh that reflective skills again. And then when they do it with me, in terms of, yes, I do mark it as well, but it's linked to other elements. So they reflect in the second time. When they reflect, they also reflect on their entire work experience journey or their entire job study that they've done, on the other hand, if they didn't want to go out and do work experience. And it is very much linked to, are you describing the experience, or are you really analysing what's happened and where it's going to take you? And so we look at how they're using the information they've gathered from the module and how they're then articulating it.
Okay, well, I'm going to have thanks very much to you both, Simon and Sarah. I had your former colleague, Michael Lower, desperate to ask you a question. Perhaps he can do that offline later, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid.